All right. Thank you for doing this, Surbhi. And thank you to all those who are just tuning in. My name is Subah Zaeem, and I head alumni relations at Draper U. And joining me today is Surbhi Sarna. She's an entrepreneur and now a partner at Y Combinator, leading their efforts in bio and healthcare. Previously, she turned her teenage cancer scare into a company that was acquired by Boston Scientific for $275 million US dollars. She's recognized for her work and efforts globally thanks to her commitment to innovation in women's healthcare and passionate leadership. She's also the recipient of multiple prestigious awards for women's health. And yeah, she also happens to be our Pilot 2012 Hero Training, our founding program. She's an alumni for it. And she is now officially an author as well. So congratulations on the book release, Surbhi. I believe it is releasing on March 7th and is titled Without Doubt.
That's right. Yeah. And at this point, at the time of, filming the interview, that's just 2 weeks out.
Wow. Okay. All right. So just to tap into now, I know that I would like to start with more about the book. Who should be reading this book and what inspired you to write this book to begin with?
I sold a company to Boston Scientific in 2018. And in 2019, I was actually approached by another publisher about publishing a book. The Me Too movement was going on, and I think that they had in their mind that more examples of women that have followed their dreams and could offer at least one path or one example of achieving those dreams would make a big impact. And actually, until very recently, I wasn't even on Twitter. I tend to be a more private person. So initially, I didn't think I was going to do it. But then I noticed something kind of interesting. Whenever I spoke at a conference, and in this particular case, I spoke at the Forbes 30 Under 30 conference, I noticed that the vast majority of people that lined up to ask me questions whenever I gave a talk were either women or people of color or immigrants of some sort. And so even if, only like 10% of the conference fit that category, or like, let's say, 50% of whatever conference fit that category, like 90% of my line would look like that. And I think it just started like really hitting home that maybe it's worthwhile doing, so that's what really inspired me to write the book. In terms of who should read it, I try to make the book full of sort of practical advice as to what to do as a founder, how to face adversity and still make progress. And so anyone who feels like they're struggling in some way or a little bit outside of the box of what they expect, I think would really benefit from reading the book. Because I think the most important decision I made while I was running the company was to keep going in the face of a lot of doubt, by other people, being doubted by other people, by being doubted by myself even, And so, and every founder has that, really. Every founder has a little bit of doubt about what they're doing, their idea, their concept. And I see that again and again in Y Combinator. So I tried to even though I signed the book deal in 2019, I didn't really start writing until 2021 because of the pandemic. Yeah. And at that point, I was kind of deep into my journey with Y Combinator. So that enabled me to write a book that's not just uniquely about my experience, but what I see other founders dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not an aspiring founder yet, but somehow, and I've been following your post about the book and all of the small blurbs that I got to read, it hit home. I could totally relate to it. So thank you for sending this book out into the world. It's amazing.
I really hope it makes an impact. So thank you.
All right. So coming back to Envision Medical, which you found in 2009, what made you start the company?
Yeah. So actually, I had a bit of a cancer scare when I was in high school. So one day I felt this searing pain in my side, and the physicians at first didn't know what was going on, but they finally realized that I was ailing from complex ovarian cysts, but they couldn't tell me whether or not those cysts were cancerous or not. And like high school's hard enough without any of that.
Oh, yeah.
Of telling like teenage boys who are going through puberty that something's wrong with their ovaries, right?
Yeah.
And it was amazing how long we had to wait before we knew whether or not it was cancerous. And basically, there was no medical intervention that could tell me. And during this whole time, I just did so much reading about women's health and so much reading about ovarian cancer. And I just got stuck in my head that one day I wanted to be part of the solution to this problem. So even though I didn't start the company till many years later, because I went to Berkeley and, studied what I did, the whole time I thought, how does this apply to women's health? Because I had that initial scare.
Yeah, but and another thing, because I was reading up on some of the interviews that have been published since 2013. I think, from what I understand, and I could be wrong, um, being successful or being a successful entrepreneur and raising money was just, I somehow feel like it was always a second priority to you. And the first priority was always just, serving humanity, saving lives, and, the bigger picture. Um, and I just felt like that is one of the biggest reasons that you were successful, because you just kept driving because you had a bigger purpose. So that just makes you a good human to begin with. And then everything on top of that. So,
Yeah, thank you. I, entrepreneurs should really only be entrepreneurs if they see a problem they really, really want to solve and they can't see themselves doing anything else but working on that problem. Because success in the form of money is the last thing that's guaranteed. And it's a lot of years of your life. And what keeps you going when things are really, really hard certainly isn't kind of the money that you're imagining will be at the other end of things. It's that joy of talking to your customers and knowing that you're solving the true problem for them, right? So
absolutely.
for me, I really didn't think about an exit. Like I just every day made one step towards progressing this device for early detection of ovarian cancer forward, and then everything else kind of comes as it does if you are really focused on the product and really focused on your team.
That's true. All right. And now I hear that there's a part in the book that is dedicated about your DU experience. So let's talk a little bit about that. How was that experience? And so you were part of the pilot program in 2012, and you had already founded Envision. So what I'm also interested to know is if the program sort of contributed to your overall journey, if, after the program, you changed the way you decided to progress or pivot or anything. And also if you're in touch with any of your cohort members still, and how was the experience overall?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had only raised maybe $250,000 before I joined the DU pilot program. So it was really, really early in my journey. I kind of knew the space I wanted to work in, of course, right, because of the patient scare. And I had a couple of other people who sort of believed deeply in the idea and who had made an investment. But I had never encountered something like DU before. And it served me in multiple ways. First, the activities at DU were kind of formed to get you out of your comfort zone. So it was the first time that I had done sort of impromptu public speaking like over and over again, and to make sure to kind of implement that into the curriculum. So I got really, really comfortable with that very quickly. I mean, not to mention like having to jump into the pool with all your clothes on,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, right? And the second thing was we got to hear all of the successful entrepreneurs speak. During the pilot program, a investor from one of Draper's funds drove the very first Tesla Model S from Tesla to the front of DU.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was like tasting a bit of the future, like seeing all of this and being around the type of founders that Tim would bring in to speak with us. And in terms of any changes that I saw moving forward that I made, I think that Tim helped me change the way that I pitch fundamentally and to this day, which is I never started my pitch with my personal story. I thought it was too personal. I thought, investors just want to look at the numbers. And Tim is the one actually or who originally encouraged me that, in fact, I should be talking about that I started as a patient, that I should go ahead and let investors know why I was going to be doing this for years to come and why the problem was so important to me. And Tim was the one that encouraged me to do that originally. And I haven't really changed that since. I, all the way through the acquisition, always talked about me being a patient and why I was on the journey. So that was a fundamental change. And in terms of, if I met anyone there, Chrissy Bertoli is still a very close friend of mine. She was also part of the pilot program. And unfortunately, I was already married by the time I went into the pilot program. But Chrissy got married afterwards, and I, got to be part of her wedding. I was a bridesmaid, and we are still incredibly, incredibly close. I'm godmother to her daughter, and so I can't even quantify, all of the things that DU gave me. And Tim also became an investor in a company, which was invaluable.
Yeah. And so what was that like? A lot of early stage founders, I'm sure, are interested in just raising money and that much amount of money. What was that like?
Yeah. You know what? Here's the thing I would say to all the early stage founders out there. The most important thing to remember when you're fundraising is that you shouldn't be leaning on investors to validate your idea. And so, we all read TechCrunch or whatever it is, and we see these huge sums of money being raised. And then as a first-time founder, you think, oh man, this must be easy. I'll just go out there and there'll be people who are interested. I just want to say it's hard for everybody the first time you go out there, besides very few select people who just happen to be working on like whatever the latest fad is, basically. And the big thing to remember is to keep going when you hear no's, because all it takes is one yes. I think I was turned down more than 50 times, because after 50 times you lose count, so like somewhere in that magnitude, it was just like rejection after rejection. But I didn't need more than Tim and two others to say, okay, I'm going to write you this first check to build my prototype and get off to the races,
Okay. And so how do you convince the first founder, the first investor?
So, first of all, the space and the idea has to resonate with them naturally, right?
Yeah.
And so, and often with the first investor, you have to have a lot more patience than you will with later folks. And so there's a couple of tips that I give people just generally to follow when it comes to this, not just recruiting investors, but recruiting employees, recruiting advisors, and that's to take their time very seriously. So for example, if you're on a coffee date with an investor or an advisor or someone else, and they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, write it down and then get back to them later. And so instead of just like a simple thank you, go ahead and detail the answer to the question that you couldn't answer, because it shows that you really respect their time, right? It shows that you put thought into something that they guided you towards. And people love when people take their time seriously, because it's their most valuable asset, right?
Yes.
And then the other thing I would say is to make sure that before you fundraise, so because founders want to validate their idea by seeing if investors will bite, what they do is they start fundraising before they're ready. they start going out there and talking about the story before they know the answers to all the questions. Investors are not there to brainstorm with you. Investors are there to look at your fully fresh idea and then tell you, like, hey, I'm interested in this or not, and not provide you that validation. So just be an absolute expert on the space, on what you're doing before you pitch, before you present, so that you come across as extremely knowledgeable.
Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the next question, which is how did you go about finding your teammates since you started the company so young? You were quite young at the time. And what was it like being a solo founder to begin with?
Yeah, look, I was a solo founder for numerous reasons. Working in a women's health device company before the word femtech was coined, before the Me Too movement, before Lean In was written, it was like a completely different climate out there. And so, honestly, I think I did face some hurdles just in terms of having men who were engineers by background, who were interested in working in women's health. Women's health has since seen a renaissance, but back then, especially, it was really difficult to kind of raise money in the space, find people interesting, people who are interested in it. And I would just say for the first employees, one of the first people I hired was my own boss at my previous company, and so I think you had to be creative about how you go about finding people and kind of getting them comfortable with things. So with Dave Snow, who was my boss at the previous cardiovascular device startup I worked for, he really wanted to do some consulting with me for some time before deciding that he wanted to sort of jump in and work full time with me. And that was fun. We got a lot done in that time period. And he very quickly realized or made an assessment about what he thought about my capabilities as a CEO, and joined full time. And once you get one senior leader on board, it becomes easier and easier to attract more leaders to the table.
Interesting. All right, great. That is interesting. All right. Okay. So I believe that you became a mom during the Envision journey. What was that like?
Yeah, I was negotiating this one term sheet. We raised about 17 million total, and I was in the middle of raising our $12 million round, and I got a term sheet. And in the middle of looking at the term sheet, I started crying, and it was really unusual for me to be crying. I had already been through a lot as an entrepreneur and had grown sort of a thick skin. And I didn't really know why, but anyway, I finished negotiating the term sheet. I signed it, and very soon after signing it, I realized that I was in fact pregnant. And it was before the money was wired, but after I had signed the term sheet, and I went through a lot of turmoil around, whether or not I tell the investors. I wasn't even pregnant enough to be telling my close friends. So, ultimately decided that I should hold back the news for a while, because somewhere along the line, you have to draw the line between, what's personal news and what's professional. And then I signed the deal to sell the company on my son's first birthday. So it was just a crazy, crazy year. And to be honest with you, I couldn't have done it without my mom moving in with me, and really helping out with the kids. And I think that for the parents out there who are also founders or people who are thinking about starting companies, you have to really protect your time. Otherwise, work eats into absolutely everything, because there's no limit or end to the work that you could be doing in a day. As a founder, it's literally limitless. So you just have to say on your calendar that, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. I'm with my kids, and 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. I'm with my kids, and I'm back online after they sleep, and really be diligent and proactive about protecting that time.
Absolutely true. And thank you for saying that. This part right up till here is going to make a difference to a lot of aspiring early stage founders, but also women-led company founders, of course. And all right, so moving back to the acquisition. what was receiving the paperwork like? And then, just working with a big company after working with smaller ones.
Yeah. So, you know, I was in complete shock when the paperwork actually came through. Like we had talked about earlier, it was never really a focus. And in that moment, I was sort of paralyzed with disbelief and reading it. And then to make it feel more real, I did something I didn't think I would do, which is I drove to my husband's office and waited for him downstairs with a printed piece of paper in my hand so he could tell me, like, yes, this is real, this is happening right now. So that was kind of the moment of receiving it, and especially because it isn't a focus, especially because we had half the money we raised in the bank and it was kind of early in the company's lifetime. It was just like surprising. And it's not just all gold confetti. Like, of course, it's amazing to have that sort of payout and all of that to get to a place where you're financially secure, of course. But at the same time, this is a product that I was completely in love with, that I had been thinking about since I was a child, basically. And so, it was a hard decision to let it go. And I actually said no to the first couple of offers because, it was just hard for me to imagine parting ways. Luckily, I really did enjoy working at Boston Scientific, who ultimately acquired it. And I got to lead some of the commercial work that was being done for the Envision device, which was, the company that I was working on. And so that was very rewarding. Ultimately, though, I did gravitate back to the startup world because that was where so many of my roots were.
Yeah. And so, what are you working on now? What is the goal now? And if you're part of any women's healthcare missions and efforts?
Yeah. I mean, one of the first ways I got back involved with the startup world is that Y Combinator came and asked me to give a talk Thursday evening in front of their batch before the pandemic started. Mm-hmm. And the energy in the room was just electrifying for me. It just woke up this part of me that after a couple of years at being Boston Scientific, I had forgotten what it felt like to be at sort of the very earliest stages, ground zero with the startups. And yeah, that part of me was really hard to ignore. And so I kept on having conversations with Y Combinator. First did some part-time work with them and am now the partner at Y Combinator that leads sort of the healthcare and bio efforts of the institution. And it's just been so rewarding working with founders and kind of sharing all of the pain and mistakes I made. So hopefully it helps them avoid one or two of their own. And then in terms of women's health, I think that I'm one of the most prolific investors in women's health. I've invested in 22 women's health companies in 2 years. Wow. Which is a lot. And, all of the women's health companies that I work with, they have my cell phone number. They can call me at any time. And I make it sort of a personal mission to make sure that they're successful.
That's amazing. I believe you're on the board of Astia, correct?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And so also coming back to what you just said, now that you're an investor, what traits do you look for in a founder when you're making investment decisions?
Yeah. And for Astia briefly, they support women entrepreneurs. And so working in women's health or outside of women's health, a big focus of mine is, not only how to increase the number of female founders, but how to increase support for the female founders that do exist. And so Astia is like a wonderful organization that does just that. So very rewarding to work with them. So in terms of founders and what I look for, because famously Y Combinator does these sort of like 10-minute interviews. There's a long list, but I can tell you a couple of my favorite traits I look for is, first, can they tell me if people really want or need the product that they're making, right? YC's motto is make something people want. In healthcare, often it's you're making something people need. And how well do they understand sort of the problem that they're going after? Can they describe, for example, the patient journey to me and how that changes with their innovation? I also want them to be able to quickly answer questions that I perceive at least as basic about their business, because it shows me a certain level of obsessiveness. And so being obsessed with a particular space, I look for having so much energy that you're like bouncing out of your seat. I look for a deep understanding of the space, you know, and then eventually what I get to see long term, and that's just in the interview, but grittiness is maybe my favorite quality of an entrepreneur. And that part of that is being very resourceful, being able to bounce back when things get tough, but also being able to admit that things are tough, right? Because if a founder is not willing to talk to me about the hard times, I can't really help them.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah, no, those are some solid things to take back and memorize. And thank you for putting these out there. But what about coming back to the healthcare landscape right now? It's very different from 2009. What are you seeing in healthcare? What would you, what would you like to see and what would you like to invest in?
So I'm agnostic about the exact type of space I invest in, okay? And what that means is that I invest in diagnostics, I invest in medical devices, biotech, computational biology, synthetic biology, anything that touches the science or, digital health. I'm there, I'm interested. So unlike a lot of firms, we're sort of agnostic in terms of having a very, very specific strategy of where to invest, right? Again, what I'm looking for is the need that they're solving, how big the market is, and so I'm happy to invest in any of those spaces. In terms of trends that we're seeing right now, there's so much being done with, of course, AI and computational biology.
Yes.
And I am so excited to see the potential of, how much this is going to enhance, for example, finding targets for drugs. We're going to be able to process information at a speed that's, 10 times or even more faster than what we've done before. And so I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of sort of at-home diagnostics, machine going into the lab more and more sort of obsolete to get a blood draw. And I love anything that empowers the patient, So those are a couple of the trends that we're seeing.
All right. Awesome. Great times to be alive in. And with that, I guess part of the startup ideology, and this is something that we hear Tim say a lot, is go full speed ahead. And now, thanks to the book, we can say go full speed ahead without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's, the only doubt that you should be without the whole time is that you are building something that truly, truly, your customers want, because there's going to be so much doubt the rest of the way. And in the book, I try to kind of be honest about the different times that I was finding doubt, but I also sort of offer a practical guide on every step of the way, everything that we talked about. How do you find that first investor and convince them to come on? How do you find that teammate? How do you find something that you love, that you're passionate about working on? What does it feel like to try to balance family and friends and work as a founder? So in no way do I think that I have all of the answers or that my path represents all paths, but I at least did want to offer one path in without a doubt.
True. And thank you so much for your time, Surbhi. I cannot wait for the book to be out. And I also cannot wait for this feature to be out. It's been an awesome interview. We are taking back so many gold notes from this interview. So thank you so much for joining us.